Joining me from Miami is Remi Piet. He's the senior partner at the consulting firm Emabelli Advisory. Now, first, if we could just start by breaking down how might Putin be held accountable for what has been described as war crimes here?
Well, first of all, obviously, we need to look at the situation in Bucha, which was a city under control of the Russian when the Russian armies was fighting up to Irpin, a little bit more southeast of Bucha. There will be an investigation if indeed the International Criminal Court is seized to actually investigate the cause of those casualties. And it seems clear from the image that since they have their hands behind their back, there was systematic execution in some cases. How will that impact Putin President Putin in a short run in terms of the current negotiations? That will not have a direct impact, but it will have an impact on the public opinions in different countries, especially potentially in Russia, if the news are able to pass through Russia, because of the claim that those civilians were not shot by Russians will actually be debunked if it's the case indeed. So that's where the pressure will be more for the public opinion, maybe a stepping up of economic sanctions, not only on Russia, but also of partner countries that would actually support Russia despite the confirmation of war crimes, and that would actually reinforce the economic sanctions on Russia. But this is a little more in a mid-term to the long term. In a short run, that will not impact immediately the negotiation, as Russia is just repositioning its armies to the eastern side of the country of Ukraine.
But indirectly, this is adding pressure, or directly, but just by adding the pressure on the US and Europe to do more to punish Russia, surely it's going to somehow complicate the peace talks that are currently underway between Ukraine and Russia, given the fact that the rhetoric is ramping up, sanctions are ramping up. This is not going to necessarily help the negotiation stance from NATO and the West.
Yeah, absolutely. But also it sends a message that Russia will be held accountable about what has happened on the ground, which is also a strong incentive for trying to find an end to this negotiation, end to this conflict. If you don't keep account and put at bay the criminals, they tend not to negotiate. But here in the case of stepping up also the pressure from other countries, whether the US or Europe, the economic sanctions are already strong. They actually will face more impact into longer term, but that will obviously strengthen the alliances against Russia from countries supporting Ukraine, but just showing the realities on the ground and the fact that the narrative in Moscow that it was a war of liberation, of cleansing from Nazis in Ukraine was actually a false narrative. Eventually, the information is stronger than propaganda and will be able to pass to the public opinion and have this then direct impact on trying to force changes on the Kremlin side.
Now, Zelensky went as far as accusing Russia of genocide against Ukrainian people this morning. Some of the observers warned that this violence has the potential to become genocidal, particularly given Russian propaganda and physical destruction of Mariupol and other cities. But others say that the Russian violence doesn't meet the legal requirements of genocide. What are these legal requirements? Where does Ukraine stand when it comes to these allegations, in your view?
Well, when you look at genocide, it's a question of systemic destruction of group of populations. So here in that case, when you're looking at the image of Bucha and the other cases, you do see the civilians on the ground and some that were not in military posture and that were riding the bike, or other that might have been the victims of snipers and shot simply because they were Ukrainians, or because there was a question of taking over the territory and therefore not making a distinction between militaries and civilians. That would qualify in terms of genocide, of having a specific group of population targeted by others. Now, in the case of being able to move forward on this classification, whether the International Criminal Court engage into it, Russia is not a member of the ICC, so even their conclusion will not actually be able to have a strong impact on Russia. But that will nourish and document the situation on the ground, and nourish also report from other institutions and bodies such as the United Nations Human Rights Commission, which is headed by former President Bachelet, from Chilean President Bachelet, that will more in the longer run be able to put at bay and clearly keep tabs on the situation that has happened on the ground, and therefore bring people to justice eventually. That's in the best case scenario. In the short run, as I'm saying, the impact might not be might more be, let's say, on public opinion, and therefore strengthening the pressure on being able to find conclusion in the short run in Ukraine, whether it is on neutrality of the territories, whether it is a question of territorial situation. There's been some progress recently. As confirmed by Ukraine, but it has to be confirmed.
You mentioned that Russia isn't part of the ICC, but nor is the US. So what does it mean for the US, given that, like Russia, it's not a member of the ICC, and also that human rights groups say that they've committed war crimes of their own, particularly in Afghanistan? What is the purpose here for the US, and is there any contradiction?
I mean, that's a very good question, and you're right to mention that the U.S. is not a member of the ICC either, which would put issues if the roles were reversed, obviously. But here, you're looking at the ICC and the institutional strength of an investigative body that has been showing its capacity to do so on other theater of operations, whether it was in the former Yugoslavia, it was in Africa, of being able to document genocides or attacks on certain populations. So the interest here is the fact that you will have certified organization that will be able to carry that work. Now, whether or not this will have an impact in the longer run from maybe showing the fact that the US should also be a member of the ICC, that's another debate, but that will at least be able to give the forensic proofs and the information on being able to see what has happened on the ground, and therefore be able to oppose to the narrative which is in the Kremlin, supported by a large majority of Russians today, and that's why this conflict is ongoing. But when you start having proofs that is placed before your eyes and being able to have a contradictory debate on this, that might actually be a key element, and definitely into the long-term solution to this conflict is going to be extremely important for the rebuilding eventually if we arrive to that stage. But that's really a long-term scenario.
Okay, thank you for that, Remi. Remi Piet there from Emma Belli Advisory.
My pleasure.
Coming up, China